Welcome to Don't Be a Meathead. This is Mark Thomas, and look who I have here. Amazing. Both of you at the same time, Dr. Steve Horwitz, Dr. Alan Manison. And today, I couldn't think of two better guys to talk about this. It's the time of year where summer's coming to an end. Fall sports are about to begin, which, of course, begin at the end of summer. And one of the things that's absolutely necessary before that starts is what we call the PPE. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The PPE is the pre-participation exam. You go to the doctor, they check you out, make sure you're okay to play. It's pretty simple. And I got to be honest, when I was a kid, I'm like, I'm healthy. What do I have to do this for? Like, there's nothing wrong with me. But you guys see it a lot deeper than that, of course, as professionals. Steve deals with a lot of high level stuff in Texas. He used to work in Maryland. He was with the 96 Olympic team for the United States track team. Alan works in Maryland, also deals with professional athletes and kids of all levels, including his own kids. So, of course, we see this from every angle. So, Steve, let me start with you. I was a naive kid. It just seemed like a real inconvenience that I had to go to my doctor and get a physical. I felt fine, but yet you say it's necessary.
That's absolutely necessary. We have a son who plays football in high school. So you have to have a proper exam, but you need to go to a doctor that knows what they're doing and not just blows right through it. And there is a form from the American Academy of Pediatrics. That's the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as the American College of Sports Medicine. They've consulted with each other and made one form that's the pre-participation physical examination. So it's usually got 3 Ps, but it's basically 2 sheets of paper. It's a history form, and then which is for the parents to complete with their athlete, and then there is an exam form that the doctor completes. And it will tell you the history form has about 50 questions on it. And it is not something that as a parent you should blow through. You need to read the questions and pay attention, because this has changed over the years. Another issue is each state has a state high school sports association, and the state may not be current with their forms. So that's something to consider as well. Most states are now. I've recently checked this, and I think at least 40 out of 51, including the District of Columbia, would be the current form, and that means the 2019 American Academy of Pediatrics form. It hasn't been updated since then. That history form, you got to go over it and read the questions and really think about it. And we have something unique that I don't mind sharing. Our son is adopted. So that adds another level of complexity to those questions regarding a history. Take, for example, sickle cell trait. Very important to know. Does your child have sickle cell trait? Well, if your child was born after 2005-ish, even if they were adopted, you're supposed to have been told. Many parents don't know. Many moms who've given birth and then the dads, they don't know about that. And that puts your athlete at risk for instance, heat injury. So you need to know those kind of things. And if you don't know any family history on the child, then maybe it behooves you to, for instance, get a little bit better cardiovascular check than just an auscultation, just the listening to the heart and blood pressure. So you can see there's levels of complexity based on your family's history.
Mm-hmm. And Steve, when we're dealing with sickle cell also, isn't I know like the athletes, in Texas travel around a lot. Let's say you're in high school, not so much, but as they get older, college, they travel to higher elevation. That's also very dangerous for sickle cell, correct?
Correct. Yep. Heat and elevation. Right.
So
you just want to know, and it doesn't mean the athlete can't compete. It just means you need to know about it. And maybe your kid shouldn't be sitting there playing video games and air conditioning all summer, and then you expect your kid to come out here in the Texas heat and perform. That's shame on parents. Everybody's involved in this decision-making process, and everybody needs to work as a team.
I'm asking because I don't know. Sickle cell, is it only applicable to kids with African descent, or is it applicable to everybody?
Oh boy, we did not talk about this before we recorded it. I want to say that. Real story. 14-year-old boy, North Carolina, 6, 8 years ago, sickle cell trait. This boy, first day of high school football practice. What did the coaches do? Tough man workout, right? First day, we gotta teach those high school kids who's boss, right? Bad move. Bad move. Hot day. This boy died. He died. The athletic director, well known for 35 years. We've never had a problem till he did. How's he going to be remembered? Here's the complicating factor. Medical history. Where was the medical history on this kid? Would the stories, I don't know, did the parents share it? Did the parents know? Boy was white, sickle cell trait. So yes, more common in African descent. Our son is mixed race, for an example. He does not have that. But this boy was white.
Interesting.
Where was the medical history? And, as a parent, you got to know. You got to be out there first day of practice if you're not sure. What can I tell you? You need to be involved as a parent, period.
So what's standard in an exam like this to get somebody cleared to play sports? What do we want to make sure happens?
So we want to make sure that we review the history with the parent. So it's not just hand in the sheet. And the problem with the sports physicals, for instance, in the high schools, the sports physicals are frequently done en masse, meaning, it really doesn't matter whether it's an athletic trainer or a nurse practitioner or a physician, because I don't really care about the letters after your name. Either you're skilled or you're not. And let me tell you, there are plenty of athletic trainers more skilled than some of the physicians doing these. And I know that's going to get I'm going to get heat for that. But bottom line is, what's your skill level? Trust me, when I was on the Olympic team medical staff, we didn't really care about the letters after your name. We cared about the skill of the person helping the athlete. That's
my
all
dog
that
barking.
mattered. Enough said about that. So if it's done en masse, is it being done too quickly? And I'm very concerned when it's done en masse that history form is not being reviewed. So that's first and foremost, and that can be a much longer discussion. So instead of going over it now, I'll just say download it, and you can just type in pre-participation physical examination and put in your state's name, and your state high school sports association should come up on the search engine, and you can download it from that. And then answer the questions honestly. And then the physician, it's a really basic examination. So auscultation, listening to the heart, eyes, ears, nose, throat. And then the musculoskeletal part is, I'll say that's another part that's kind of a goose egg with a lot of these, that things are not detected. And then getting a good history on prior injury as well. So without going into the details, everything that the physician is supposed to do, I'm looking at the form, that's why I'm looking down, is literally on the form. It's a pretty simple exam, but it needs to be done. And I'll say also, unfortunately, you look around really anywhere in the country, oh, we do sports physicals for $25. If you're doing a 5-minute exam, I know you don't want to pay the money, and I know everything's crazy expensive these days, but I don't know what to tell you about that either. It's just a good exam needs to be done, and a discussion with the parent needs to be had, which I recently had. I just did the whole band, for instance, at a local high school. And there were some interesting things that we discovered. And honestly, if you look at the medical literature, the biggest reason for not clearing an athlete is vision.
Really?
And many of the athletes, so here's the thing, if you wear glasses, bring the glasses to the exam.
Right.
That doesn't happen, so the physician has to say not cleared, or not cleared until they get an eye exam. But that's one of the biggest reasons, is vision.
Steve, do you see any instances, or is it common that, due to competitive nature of sport, that people actually lie on the forms? Like we know from concussion and college, and definitely in the pros, they'll kind of fake their way through, like using an aeromat pad for balance tests after a concussion when they're screened out. It doesn't look like they actually have a concussion. So there are ways of like little cheats around the system, or they purposely score low on something. So when they are injured, they score low. It looks like it's the normal baseline. Are people dishonest at the high school level on these tests, either the parents or the athletes themselves?
Yeah, I'm always like you, we've been around the block just a few times, right? So you just have to take a step back, and you can kind of detect whether or not somebody's being honest. And when it's a kid, I have zero patience. Adult, do whatever you want. But man, as a kid, I just have no patience for any of that, because I want to see that athlete bloom and get everything they can. If that's what they're interested in, get everything they can get out of their body and be as absolutely as successful as they possibly can. And, for competitive parents that way, yikes, too many bad stories.
You see a lot also because you instruct CPR. You see a lot of the heart ailments and the conditions that can be like glossed over. It's not a big deal, or the heat issue, whatever. And I know we've discussed over the years how many athletes you've personally seen or gotten calls from other parents and doctors regarding kids collapsing on the field. You gave one example there with the sickle cell trait, but even without that, having other underlying conditions that parents might say, when he was 6 years old, yeah, whatever, but it's not a big deal. Poo-poos it, doesn't put it on the form. And then that child happens to be a high risk, but no one knows it until they end up, I guess, in the hospital if they're lucky, after an incident on a field, right?
Right. So that's another thing to bring up is the high schools in each state will require it. But what about everything outside of high school? So many sports, volleyball, soccer, for instance, many sports are played at the highest levels outside of the schools. Depends on the sport, right? So what's going on there? And from a safety perspective, which would include the pre-participation, I've seen sports leagues here lots of times. I called a local sports league asking them if they were interested, for instance, in training their coaches in CPR. They said not interested. Another league said, a parent actually asked the question, do we need participation physicals for our kid for this Pee Wee football league? No, you don't need it.
Yeah, that I don't understand either.
I don't know what
and I see that too. You have these club organizations, and in certain sports like lacrosse, soccer, maybe football is a little bit different. But most of the kids are going to college from the clubs, not from the high schools. And whether it's an academy level or ECNL or whatever, I've never seen any of these clubs do any type of of pre-participation exam. And then on top of that, as we'll be discussing a little bit on the next segment of this, is are they even complete enough in high school to pick up? I mean, when you look at female soccer players, for example, and Steve, you and I have discussed this a lot. You go to a teenage female game, girls game, and there are 3 of the athletes on the sideline with knee braces on. And we know, and I have more material coming out on this, that due to overtraining and whatnot, that 50% of all youth sports injuries are preventable. 50%. But due to overtraining, poor biomechanics, no assessment, I mean, there aren't really a lot of people in the sports fitness or training element or field that are working with these premier athletes in a club system. And so, I mean, see, we talk about the high schools as kind of mandated. What do you think needs to happen at the club level to get them moving on this? Because this idea of next man up or next woman up if someone gets hurt just doesn't cut it if it's your kid. The clubs definitely need to do more. What's your thought on that?
I know Alan's asking me, but I'm going to throw it on the other parent, Mark. What do you think listening to this? You think it's important?
Yeah, my first thought is hopefully my kid gets an annual checkup right from their doctor, and you hope their pediatrician is pretty thorough with what they do. So you might have some kind of idea going into it. I don't know if you'd want to go back to your pediatrician and have anything further done with your kid, with
an annual exam. If you look at American Academy of Pediatrics, for instance, an annual exam is definitely different than a pre-participation physical. So there are additional things done or should be done on the pre-participation physical that is exactly pre-participation. Is your child cleared to play? So yes, you'd want to go back. But I think the point of the question Alan's asking is, you're sending your daughter to high school to play soccer. Check the box. You get the pre-participation physical. But for the youth league, they don't. What?
And it's more competitive and a longer season.
Right. So and then if your kid transitions, so some kids just won't play high school soccer and they'll only play in the leagues. So then all of a sudden, they're not in high school. They're not playing in high school, so we don't need to do the pre-participation physical. Is anybody home?
Yeah. And then also looking at it, and as I said, we'll get into this more, it's when you look at the common injuries, and if you're to look at certain injuries, certain sports, they seem to happen over and over and over again. They're very common. Like 80% of knee injuries start with a tracking issue, generally lateral versus medial about 99% of the time. Has anyone ever, I mean, in my office all day long with my youth athletes, I'm assessing this, fixing it, balancing it out so they don't have problems. And Steve and I talk about stability and mobility all the time. But the bottom line is, if the kids don't have a healthy foundation and their biomechanics are wrong, who's actually looking for that? Because I don't think the pre-participation exam is even covering that magnitude. They're not looking at an athlete run. They're not looking at them jump. They're not looking at them step and see if they need buckles. But yet when you go on the field and you have an injury, you go, I don't understand. Well, what could have happened? My athlete, she runs all the time. She trains all the time. But are the proper things being done? And I think in too many instances, everything's overlooked. And you don't have the right personnel to know what's actually going on with an athlete, unfortunately, until they're injured.
I think that's a great preview for what's coming next. Is what's the exam? Well, we kind of went over that. It's a nice history and some basics like eyes, ears, nose, throat, and orthopedic. I'm just looking down, making sure you're feeling the lymph nodes. Some very basic exam items. That's your standard pre-participation sports physical. How much of an orthopedic assessment is done? Well, it's very interesting. I'd pick up the form because it says musculoskeletal, and it says, neck, back, shoulder, elbow. But what's actually being done? Do they quickly assess just the range of the motion? For instance, can you straighten out your elbow? I don't know what goes on in other offices. I know what goes on in my office, but that I think is what Alan's talking about. What's next? What needs to be done in addition to that? And I think that's very important for parents to understand.
Yeah, I mean, if it's that brief where it just lists like a body part, and Steve, you and I know, I mean, we get into assessing shoulders and how many orthopedic tests and range of motion tests and muscle. There's so many things that you can do to figure things out, but I don't think any of these exams at any level are really going deep enough for any athlete, but especially the higher level ones. When you see these injuries occurring on the field, it's like, oh my God, most, we know from research, 50% could be prevented. I'd say even higher than that if we really got on things earlier. So,
all right. So let's start with everybody definitely get the basic pre-exam, right? Pre-participation physical exam. So we've covered that here in part one. We're going to wrap part one up. And then in part two, what I want to talk about is what else would you like to see in these exams that, can take it a little bit deeper, talk about some of the things that we just addressed. And if you guys were the czars of youth sports, in designing what it's going to look like, you're going to tell us in part two. So, Alan, where can they find us online?
We're everywhere. We're on Twitter, which is now X, excuse me. Definitely YouTube. Come on over to YouTube, watch all our videos. Great information on all different levels, from the sports injury side to footwear, to sports nutrition with Kara Zallard, to what Steve's talking about here, to injury, to the psychological component of sport. Very important. Everywhere we're Don't Be Meathead, Facebook, of course, our website. But if hit us up on YouTube, hit us up on X, on Instagram as well, everywhere, and spread the word, because what I like to tell people is help us help you. We are here to do this as a service because we all have kids and we all want to help out, and we see things that could be done in a better way. In a lot of cases, things are being done at all, but things sometimes are being done, but they could be done better. We're here to try to correct those wrongs and make things better and be a resource for parents and athletes alike and coaches, to help better educate the community, like the nation, literally. And we can't do this without everyone watching and spreading the word and whatnot. And whenever anyone has any questions, fire away. Send us an email, send us a text, send us a message on something. We're here to help everyone out.